Good morning. So, the third part of the book on intensive self education is on self realization. Yeah, it's still quite a whole chapter. So, here we go. Preparation for sitting in silence. Religious inquiry is questioning one's nature, questioning the validity of one's behavior, and finding out how the I has been built up and what the nature of its limitations are, which become manifest when we talk, work, and are with other people. No one else can do this inquiry for me. I have to do it myself. When one does this, when one becomes aware of all the limitations that give us only a second hand contact with reality, and that also with parts of reality, not with the totality, when we become aware of this fact, then there is the urge to find out how to commune with the totality. So she says, when we question, I'll read it again. Religious inquiry is questioning one's nature, questioning the validity of one's behavior, and finding out how the I has been built up and what the nature of its limitations are, which become manifest when we talk, work, and relate with other people. No one else can do this inquiry for me. I have to do this myself. When one does this, when one becomes aware of all the limitations that give us only a second hand contact with reality, and that also with parts of reality only, not with the totality, when we become aware of this fact, then there is the urge to find out how to commune with the totality. You cannot commune with the totality on the sensual level. The senses all have their limitations. They can touch one object at a time. 100 objects can be touched with the mind, but they cannot grasp the totality. The totality that has spread itself out in space and in the timeless now can't be grasped sensually. It can't be grasped mentally. People have tried to grasp it through thoughts, through words about it, but they have all failed. So it seems necessary, living in the physical structure, moving through the psychological structure, to explore if there is a trans-psychological dimension to consciousness. If there is another dimension of consciousness which does not have this me at the center, and human knowledge and thought at the periphery or the circumference. Spiritual inquiry is an inquiry about a trans-psychological dimension of consciousness. It's a non-cerebral exploration. If such an exploration has to take place, it implies it has to take place without the movement of the me, the I. If me moves, then it brings with it the whole past. It brings my knowledge, my parents' knowledge, my family inheritance, my racial inheritance. As soon as the me moves, the total past moves along with it. The past uses the senses and looks at the present in such a way that the past can't remain alive and continue to survive. So without the movement of the me, and without the interpretation on the part of my brain? Can there be a perception leading to an intimate, direct contact with reality as it is? Contact with reality without the mask the human race puts upon it. If this is to happen, the center of the me will have to go into non-action. So how does this religious inquiry begin? Verbal investigation of the physical and intellectual analysis of the psychological is something already done. The real beginning is not on the physical or psychological level, but by tackling the question of the movement from the psychological to the trans-psychological. So the center of the me has to go into non-action, otherwise the brain will be busy interpreting. The me moves, and the interpretation of the brain goes on. This can't be stopped. It's a momentum filled in the very marrow of my bones. So how can the center of the me go into non-action? The I is an evolved form of consciousness. It's different from consciousness that we see in other species. It's a self-conscious energy. Therefore the I can, through verbal investigation, look at its own limitation and can grasp it intellectually. After having seen its limitation, the center says, if my knowledge and the movement of the I is going to be an obstacle, something that prevents further exploration, I relax into non-action. As for further exploration, my movement is of no use. Going into non-action is not something negative. It is a very positive and creative step that the I consciousness can take. What happens when the center ceases to move? What happens when the mind moves not? Is there any time sense apart from the mind? Movement of the me is the movement of time. Mind is time. It is with the movement of mind that one becomes conscious of today's and tomorrow's and of the yesterdays. Otherwise, they are non-existent. The movement of mind brings them into existence. And otherwise, there is only the timeless now, what you call the present. It is the timeless eternity. So when the center does not move, time does not move. When one has been in the state of thought, when one has been in the state of thought freeness, one may notice that with the cessation of time, there is no fear and no tension on the nerves. There is no passivity, no inertia, but just an alert sensitivity. One is back home again in the wholeness of one's being. The I had divided life, polluted perception, and created the separation of the me and the not me. Why is it that we don't allow the me to go into abeyance? Why do we hold on to it? Could it be that we've been trained to believe that the movement of the I is the content of living? You must keep on moving? Is that it? Or is there the fear that if the I does not move, what will happen? Will it result in some kind of death? How will I come back to my ordinary life and my family responsibilities? Is that it? Suppose we're not afraid. and let the I go into non-action. What do we do? How do we proceed? What do we do when we are educating ourselves? Don't we allow some time for learning? If there is a willingness to dedicate time and energy for educating oneself, then one allots the time and sits down quietly. You don't have to chant any mantra or read any books. Relaxation into non-action is going back into yourself. It's not a movement away from yourself. We do not know how to live in emptiness. Every moment of our waking hours is filled with ego-centered activities. I would suggest that a person interested in meditation spend some time every day in complete silence. One has to begin with abstention of physical and psychological action. Physical considerations. Food and silence. It is better to sit in silence with an empty stomach. If possible, you should sit 4 hours after eating, for it takes 1.5 hours for the food to be digested and another 2.5 hours for the juices to be absorbed into the body. If there is food in the stomach, the brain cannot be quiet, as the tensions of the stomach reach the head, there being a straight connection between the solar plexus and the pituitary gland. The pliability, flexibility, and sensitivity of the whole neurological system is present if the stomach is empty. Clothing. A separate set of clothes should be set aside to be used only for the times of sitting in silence. The clothes should be of one color, and preferably of pastel shades without any designs on them. They should not be too tight, affecting the flow of circulation. Timing. The same time should be kept every day for sitting in silence. The thoughts and activities of saints are in the ether, and by sitting in silence at the same time every day, we facilitate their efforts to aid us. The intensity of a genuine inquirer creates a magnetic orbit around him which attracts these vibrations. It also creates a receptivity in the body which responds and cooperates at the specific time. One of the things that a person seriously interested in spiritual inquiry will have to do is spend 12 hours of the 24 hours in a day in complete solitude. For example, from 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. During that time, he remains completely on his own, does not meet anyone, talk to anyone, read any literature, watch TV, listen to the radio, or listen to any music. He is on his own with himself. Out of those 12 hours, a maximum of 8 hours will go into sleep. A person does not require more than 8 hours sleep. If he sleeps for more, it means he's either bored with life or has no interest in living. The other 4 hours will be spent in silence. During these 12 hours of solitude, one does not eat or drink anything. If at all necessary to drink or eat, then one can have light fruits and fresh fruit juices, but they should not be sour, or one can have a bit of milk and yogurt. It is also better if one eats before sunset, so that the stomach is empty before 8 p.m. and no fermentation takes place in the blood. Posture and breathing. What does one do when one has allotted the time? One sits down quietly to be with oneself, alone in silence. How do we do this? We sit down in a posture that is agreeable and comfortable, with the spinal cord and head erect, and breathing properly, easily, and deeply. One has to devote some time for educating the senses. We don't even know how to sit steady without getting rigid in any part of the body, so one has to educate the body. One has to educate the body in different postures and discover which posture is agreeable and comfortable to oneself. Only one hint: whether you sit in a chair, lie down, sit on the floor, please do see that the spinal cord and the neck are erect. That helps correct breathing and helps oxidization of the blood to take place properly. Also, then exhalation of breath takes place properly, and there's a rhythm established in breathing. The breathing and process of thinking are very closely interconnected. If the breathing is not proper and all the carbon dioxide not exhaled properly with exhalation or breath, then it affects the blood circulation. When there is a disturbance in blood circulation, there is a pressure on the nerves, and the thoughts contained in the whole of your being begin to unwind themselves. When you sit down with your spine erect and your body related to the earth, then you begin to notice parts of your body that have become stiff and rigid. You realize there are points of stiffness and rigidity in the body, in the hip bones, the shoulder bones, the joints of the legs, and you may feel pain and discomfort in the knees. You want to sit quietly, and the very experimenting in sitting has taught you a lesson. Life is the master. Life is the master to the willing one. The beloved life begins to teach gently, competently, and efficiently. So it has taught you now that the body is not in good shape, that there are points of rigidity in the body. You begin to treat the body yourself, give it proper exercise and proper food. You put that disorder away and you enable the body within a couple of months to be supple again. If the person is sincere and serious, then one can put this beautiful, mysterious organism that we have into order. And in that context, one has said, if you take a diet that is spice-free and especially salt-free, then the stiffness and rigidity in the joints will disappear. Not that you should not eat spices or that eating spices is unholy. The point is, there will be less fermentation in the body. There will be less toxins produced in the body. And therefore, the flow of blood and the movement of breath and also the psychological movement is more free. Now, your inquiry has widened its horizons. Now your inquiry gets related to diet, gets related to exercise, to sleep, to the kind of bed you use, the kind of mattress you sleep on. The horizons become wider and wider with every step you take. The body now has learned to sit down, and it doesn't complain. It cooperates with you, but that takes time. Education takes time. Understanding does not require time. Transformation is a happening which is not the result of your action or my action, but equipping the instrument, the apparatus, requires education, and education takes time. How long should one be able to sit in relaxed alertness? At least for 45 minutes, where the body is not stiff, rigid, passive, lethargic, nor sluggish, but every fiber is alert, tingling with freshness and alert sensitivity. Sitting quietly, you then close your eyes. Why is it suggested to close your eyes? Because one has not learned to keep the eyes open and yet not look at anything. Can you look at space? Normally your gaze travels through space, and it feels comfortable only when it reaches an object, registers and records it. We have not been educated to be with space, to have the eyes open, and yet be with the emptiness of space. As we are not educated to get related to the space and be with it, as soon as we keep the eyes open, the eyes register the object. And as soon as an object is registered and recorded, our mind reacts to it, as our attention is not reaction free. Our attentiveness is polluted by a terrifically quick process of reactions. Every object is registered, identified, named, evaluated, and judged. In a fraction of a second, this is what happens. Throughout the day, this is taking place. And if you keep the eyes open, this process of identifying, evaluating, reacting will go on. Later on, perhaps, your eyes may be open and nothing will be registered, but until such a time, it is suggested to keep the eyes closed as an aid to the investigation. And so far today, with these instructions for self-inquiry. So I wish you a great day. Bye for now.